Hi, this is Jefferson Calico, and this is going to be a short video on symbols and symbolic communication. And your book covers this in chapter 1 in a section on religious symbolism. So let's think about symbols and ask what a symbol is. And what we'll see is that, just to define it briefly, that a symbol is something concrete in the world which communicates something beyond itself. So let's take a look here at a few symbols and then we'll talk about them. So I showed you 3 different symbols, 3 different images, and I hope that what happened is as you saw each of those symbols that an idea or a meaning came to mind. And there you see the sort of the essence of what a symbol is. A symbol is this concrete image of some sort that communicates something beyond itself, that brings ideas, feelings, emotions to mind. Meaning. It communicates meaning. So let's think then about how we communicate. And there's a couple ways to communicate. And one of those is conceptually. So conceptual communication. So conceptual communication, or if I communicate to you, if I express meaning conceptually, then this involves words, explanations, concepts, right? Doctrine. So I am defining, I am explaining something, I am reasoning about a concept to you or with you. That's one way to communicate meaning. Now, another way, and the way we want to focus on briefly here, is to communicate meaning symbolically. And this involves not explaining and defining, but representing in some way, picturing and communicating meaning through this representational way. So, for instance, when you saw the picture of the stoplight, what idea came to mind? Probably stop. Now, the stoplight is just a red circle. It doesn't say stop, nor is there a person out on the street saying stop, stop. Instead, there's just what appears as this red light. But it communicates a meaning to us, which we know when we see it to stop. Another one that came up was a symbol from the 60s, the peace symbol. And again, I mean, if you're familiar with that symbol, it's sort of an abstract symbol, but we know when we see it that it means there's no one there that says, well, let's just all live at peace with one another. Let's just be happy and peaceful. We see the sign and it communicates, we understand what it is trying to say to us. And in fact, it means, it perhaps when we see that symbol, it may actually mean more than just let's live at peace. Let's live in peace. It may conjure up to you the whole, because it came out of what we might call the hippie movement or the counterculture of the 60s. So it might conjure up to you not only the idea of peace, but the whole sort of hippie counterculture, dropping out lifestyle. So it communicates more than just the concept, but this whole sort of way of life. And then similarly with the crucifix, right? So this is a symbol. This is in fact a religious symbol, and it communicates on many, many levels. It communicates, of course, the idea of Christ's death on the cross for sin. It communicates the idea of a personal salvation through Christ that's important in Christianity. But it may also summon up the ideas of this whole lifestyle of suffering and redemption, and sort of a way that Christians are to live in a humble, Christ-like way. And then it also may convey sort of the idea or the meaning of the church, perhaps the Roman Catholic Church, and then a whole history, 1,000, 1,500 years of history behind that. So what we see is the symbol communicates something beyond itself, and it doesn't have to do that with words or definitions or explanations. Just by picturing something, all these meanings are communicated. So from a religious perspective then, you might ask me, well, what is God like? And I could say, God is eternal. God is all-powerful. God is not physical but spiritual. God, and here's what that means. God knows all things. God is, I could say, God is a woman, or God is in the sky, or whatever it might be, right? And here's the verse, or whatever that might communicate, that proves that this is true. And that's a very conceptual way we talk about God, we define God, and reason about God, and describe God in these ways. Or you could ask me, what's God like? And I hold out to you a rock. I say, this is what God is like. Or I point to a deep lake, and I say, that's what God's like. Or I point up, see that? Point up to the sun and say, that's what God's like. Or I might show you one of many religious images. So here's the Shiva Nataraja. This is what God is like. Or I might show you, this is what God's like. Or think about this difference. Reading a book on American history as opposed to raising the flag on the 4th of July. Two ways of perhaps communicating similar things, but in such a different format. So concepts explain and symbols represent or present. Concepts are specific and cognitive, whereas symbols are polyvalent, meaning they can carry multiple levels or dimensions of meaning. They're often emotional, or what we might call precognitive. And so when we are dealing, this is why symbols, of course, are so important in religious life. Maybe less helpful in other areas of life. But for religion, symbols are very important in symbolic communication, because in religion, right, we're dealing with things that aren't necessarily concrete, that are supernatural. And it can be difficult then to put supernatural things, ideas, and supernatural experiences into words and into concepts. So the symbol is useful then because it connects us to meaning, and it connects us to experience, feelings, emotions, types of thoughts, all sorts of meanings and feelings without resorting or necessitating words. And symbols communicate in these often very powerful emotional ways if you understand how to read and connect with the symbol. And that's the important point here. So symbols always are a concrete thing that point to something beyond themselves. And there's two ways then that this communication sort of happens with symbols. One is symbols may draw on what we call learned associations. That is knowledge, cultural knowledge that we pick up on as we live with that symbol and live in the cultures that use those particular symbols. So, for instance, if we look at the Shiva Nataraja, this might mean very little for you because you don't you haven't learned how to read and understand the meaning that's conveyed by this particular image. I mean, you could come up with something. So these are learned symbols. And the stoplight, for instance, is a very good example of you don't understand what the stoplight is trying to represent unless you have this understand the cultural context behind the stoplight. Okay, so one way is that symbols draw on these learned associations. They are representational symbols. And another type of symbol is what we might call a presentational symbol, and that is that the symbol itself participates, is involved in the meaning that it's attempting to communicate. So an example of that might be indeed the crucifix, where it's actually a symbol of this suffering person on the cross, and it presents, it manifests the meaning in a concrete way.